Season 11 is here, a season of change. We've got a new companion, the continued shift away from the Earth-based format, a new title sequence, and it's the final of the Purple Era. But some of that's still far off, as this season is only beginning, and beginning with a classic. So let's get into Time Warrior and see why this story is a classic. The Time Warrior is a bit of an oddity for the Purple Era, as it is historical, something we haven't seen in any form since the Abominable Snowmen. Of course it's not a pure historical, instead a pseudo-historical, with being very close to the Time Meddler in some ways. Of course it was the Time Meddler which created the pseudo-historical format, but this was the serial to really put it on the map. But it also introduced the Sontarans to the Doctor Who universe. So let's get into the plot itself, which begins really strong, as the serial spends a decent chunk of time without the Doctor and instead introducing the historical setting. We get introduced to Irongron and his men on a night that the Sontaran crashes on Earth, this being Lynx. It works well to establish the grander setting, as we learn of Irongron's enemies and see him come to terms with Lynx, so that both can get what they want, with it ending with Lynx needing to get both people and technology which is yet to exist. From there the episode splits, and we have scenes in both the past and the modern day, where scientists have been disappearing, causing units to step in and group them all together to keep an eye on them, with the Doctor being included. This is a great stretch with it serving an important job, that being to introduce our new companion, this being one Sarah Jane Smith.
Come and meet your namesake, Miss Lavinia Smith, Dr.
John Smith. How do you do, Miss Smith?
Hello.
Now there's a lot to say about Sarah Jane, but simply put, she's simply amazing in this serial, and is a legend within the franchise. Even if you're new to Classic Who, you know of Sarah Jane. Right from the start, she's getting herself into trouble like the Doctor, with her not actually being who she says she is, as she's a reporter and was pretending to be her aunt so she could sneak in, something the Doctor sees through immediately. This is a trait which continues to appear throughout the serial, with her being a bit of a sneaky character, with her sneaking into the TARDIS, which sees her being a part of the serial's events, alongside the general activities throughout the story, where she plays a big part in the many break-ins into the castle. This isn't her only contribution, because as she's a journalist, she has a curiosity which comes naturally, which is what leads her into the constant trouble, and even makes her think that the Doctor is the one behind the disappearances, to the point that she leads a raiding party to capture him. Something that feels unique for her is that she's quite forward-thinking, with her just always standing up to whoever she is in front of, despite gender roles, of both her time and the past. Of course there have been many times her companions have stood up to people despite this, but she takes this to another level, as one scene in particular sees her nearly starting a women's rights revolution in the Middle Ages. This is something which will be expanded on, but it's interesting to see a companion being more attuned with the politics of the time they're from. One thing which I really like is when she tries to rationalise the situation and believes she's in a reenactment of the Middle Ages, with her going through several ideas before landing on that one, and then thinking they're overdoing it. Which while is just a purely fun moment, it also demonstrates her way of rationalising things. Almost everything about her is quite refreshing for a female companion, as most have been somewhat one note, or their sense of adventure doesn't really have any connection to their grander personality. But the production team did really well with Sarah here, to make her adventurous side feel natural, and this is something we'll see explored more and more. On the characters of the past, they're all very well done, with Irongron being a scary and fun villain. While not the main villain, he does well to be an intimidating figure for his pure strength despite his lack of brains. A lot of his best moments are comedic, usually his back and forth with the Doctor and Lynx, with the Lynx scenes especially being great, as they are dripping with great dialogue. His constant insulting of the Sontaran, such as calling him Toadface, are standout moments just for how funny they are, as you can feel Lynx trying not to kill the guy. Plus we have his original or more notable sounding nickname for the Sontaran, of Sky Warrior, which slowly fades away in usage as the two get on less and less. There aren't really many other notable members of Irongron's men except for Bloodaxe, who is his right-hand man. Throughout he acts as the second in command, usually backing him up or being the voice of the men. He is used entirely for comic relief because of this, with him being a complete fool even compared with Irongron. But at the same time, this does make him somewhat compelling, or at least very least memorable. There is also Meg the Kitchen Wench, who is a small character but does get some fun moments as this dominating female presence when Sarah is undercover. She's completely used to the fighting which takes place and just brushes this off whenever anything happens. Like with Bloodaxe, she is more of a voice for the servants within the castle, but she is well enough defined to be interesting in her own right. On the good side of things, we have fewer characters, with really only Halby Archer being expanded on. I say expanded on, but he's very simplistic, being a loyal archer to his lord and going on risky missions to kill Irongron. The first of these nearly succeeding if it wasn't for the interference of Sarah Jane. The other two notable ones are Lord Edward and Lady Eleanor, who are quite minor, with them being mostly in the background or just someone the Doctor and Sarah have to talk to act. Eleanor feels the more important as it's her who ends up making a lot of the decisions or being somewhat advisory to her husband throughout, with it being her who comes up with the idea and then sends Hal on the initial mission to kill Irongron. The two aren't very well fleshed out but are enjoyable enough to watch due to their belief that the Doctor is a wizard. Sadly, the funniest scene with Edward is off screen, with Sarah mentioning that he's been put in charge of painting the fake heads. The final character to really talk about is Lynx, who's really strong. There are several reasons why he is strong. Notably, we have his dynamics with several different characters, but just his general presence makes him a force to be reckoned with. As a Sontaran, he is a warrior, and with his advanced tech, he appears to be a sorcerer, or a demon to the people of the Middle Ages, which gives him a unique advantage over them, with him being able to use his great intelligence to force them to do his will, getting them to move his ship or getting the resources from them for its repairs, while in exchange making them advance weapons, which are just rifles. As he's the first Sontaran in the show, he serves as our insight into them, and from his first scene he really shows off what makes them tick, with one of his first actions to be to claim the Earth in the name of the Sontaran Empire. In fact, it would have been his first if he wasn't challenged by Irongron. Then throughout the serial he looks down on the humans, trying to control his urge to kill them all, even though it might have worked out in his favour, given he had little need of them outside of making sure nobody took the castle. Although despite this dislike of them, he does take some pleasure in seeing the battles which they take part in, with him leaving his important repairs to go along to their attempted attack on Lord Edward's castle. Even though he is a warrior, Lynx does get plenty of humorous moments, usually due to his complete lack of respect for the people of Earth, and so he speaks his mind to them all the time. The most notable of this is where he learns of females and refers to humans as having a primary and secondary reproductive system, and that it's ineffective and should be replaced. One thing that's interesting though is that despite him being a warrior, he seems to have a lack of patience for battles, as when the Doctor is being used as target practice, he is very willing to take a rifle and end it quickly. His dynamic with the Doctor is interesting, as both are aliens of his planet, but interestingly he actually knows of the Time Lords, with his people having a clear opinion of them. All of their scenes are great, as we have them either fighting through their words or actually fighting, which gives us both sides of the Doctor, while also showing off the different sides of a Sontaran. The Doctor also shows a healthy knowledge and dislike of Sontarans, we have been clear he has encountered them before. The design of Lynx is strong too. While the attempt to make it look like the Sontarans have much bigger mouths than humans didn't really work out, there is a creepiness to him. I'd also think that the choice to make Lynx quite small when compared to others works well, as he is physically imposing due to his pure strength. The weakness that the Sontarans were given in the serial was an interesting one, which works well into their desire for war, this weakness being the probing vent at the back of their necks, with Lynx seeing it as a strength as it means they have to face their enemies. One thing to note about the Sontaran name is that there was a bit of a disagreement about how it was meant to be pronounced, as writer Robert Holmes put the emphasis on the Ron part, while Lynx actor Kevin Lindsay preferred the emphasis on the Tar part, with it coming to an end when Lindsay insisted strongly on his pronunciation as he was playing the role. We do have two modern day characters to talk about, with the first being Professor Rubish, who was a roommate of the Doctor and Sarah before being captured by Lynx. He is mostly used as a comedy character, with him being somewhat eccentric and requiring glasses, with him having scenes where he uses the TARDIS as a blackboard, or wanting to stay in the past because of his interest in the architecture, despite the fact he clearly can't see any of it, or just getting some funny lines. Notably his talk about hats when he thinks the Doctor is wearing one, or when the Doctor goes to find Sarah and he gets this absolute bombshell of a line.
Look, will you excuse me? I've got to go and find a young girl. I'll see you later, I hope.
Young girl? Should have thought he was a bit old for that sort of thing.
But despite his use of humour, he is still quite smart in his own right, with him making something he can use to see while in the past. He's a charming character all in all, and a fun addition to the serial. The only other modern day character is the Brigadier, who is only briefly in the serial, with only 2 scenes in episode 1. He's basically there to introduce the events that are happening, alongside saying goodbye to the Doctor when he's explaining what's happening. This is basically a nothing appearance, but it's great to see the Brigadier instead of just some general or something. Although he does get a fun line about the Doctor's inability to control the TARDIS, which is very fitting of him. Finally, the Doctor, who as always is great here, although we are seeing him in a new setting, as we haven't really seen this incarnation in the past before. The serial really allows him to shine both in action scenes and thinking scenes, with him sneaking around the castle and often being forced into fights when his intelligence doesn't work against his opponents, which is basically every single time. There are plenty of scenes which show this humour off too, with notable ones being when he's disguised as the fighting robot and ends up fighting Irongron, which leads to him breaking character and reverting to the Doctor, although his general interactions with Irongron are just strong. This serial doesn't really give him any sciencey scenes, although he does mix up some super stink bombs to repel Irongron's attack, plus does set up the entire strategy to make it appear that the castle is well guarded. This scene also allows for the Doctor to sit down and talk with Sarah for the first time and answer most of her questions while clearing things up. Something I find of note is that despite the Doctor's opinion of Lynx and his species, he does offer his assistance to him in exchange for sending the scientist back and stopping his assistance to Irongron. Obviously this is to avoid making the situation with the weapons worse and get the people out, but I do like that this incarnation still wants to be the peacemaker first, even when facing off against a warrior who knows nothing but war. On the behind the scenes we have 1 or 2 things to talk about, the first being the change to the opening and ending credits, as this season introduced a new set of opening titles, which used a very different production method to the previous ones, in the form of slit scan. The slit scan technique is best known for its use for the Stargate sequence in 2001 A Space Odyssey, but the BBC managed to pull it off for this small science fiction show, so that's quite impressive. There was also a few changes to the text as well, as from this serial every episode would now be called a part instead of an episode. This newer version of the opening was produced alongside season 10, with a picture of the Doctor having him in his outfit from the 3 Doctors, characters. This also marks the only time we see the Doctor in his entirety during the opening. While this version would change a bit with the introduction of the next Doctor, this would basically be the version used up until the end of the 17th season. It also uses a slightly different version of the theme, which marks its final amendment to the original version before being completely redone. One funny thing to note is that the location shoot had to be shuffled around, as when the production team arrived, they discovered that they had left the TARDIS prop behind. I wonder how that actually played out when they first arrived, because it sounds very, very funny. So The Time Warrior is a classic, and I can't overstate that. While not the first to be a pseudo-historical, it was the one which made it famous. It also introduces both the Sontarans alongside the classic era's most famous companion. It does have a few problems, mostly on the production side, as there are a few dodgy moments, but it's generally really strong. The dialogue is great with the characters mostly being strong, but the only weaker ones being more minor to the events. It's a great, if not perfect opening to the new season, with Robert Holmes delivering a great script, which out of his works is up there with Spearhead. But with the Doctor and Sarah leaving the past behind them, they return to the present day to find London empty. But who is behind this, and what do they want? Next time, Invasion of the Dinosaurs.